My name is Jedediah, but no one's called me that in 30 years. It's just Jed. The name fits me, I suppose. It's short, solid, and quiet, like my life. My ranch stretches out under the big Montana sky, a whole lot of land with just one man rattling around in the middle of it. The silence was the thing that got to me the most, especially after Martha passed. The house she'd filled with laughter and the smell of baking bread just became a wooden box full of echoes. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the eaves, the lowing of my cattle, and the creak of the porch swing where I'd sit every night, watching the sun bleed out over the mountains. It was a good life, a hard life, but a lonely one. A loneliness so deep it felt like a hunger in my bones. I only went into town for supplies once a month. I'd get what I needed, nod at the folks I knew, and get back to my quiet world as fast as I could. It was on one of those trips, a hot day in late August, that everything changed. I was loading sacks of feed into the back of my old Ford truck behind the general store. The air was thick with dust and heat. That's when I heard it. Not the usual town noise, but something ugly. A man's voice, sharp and cruel as a shard of glass. "Worthless," he snarled. "I told you I needed a son, an heir. Not this. This litter." Then I heard a soft cry, a sound of pain that was quickly choked off. I'm not a man who goes looking for trouble. I've seen enough of it to last a lifetime. But something in that cry hooked into me. I put down the sack of oats and walked, slow and quiet, around the corner of the building, into the alley, and there they were. He was a big man, florid and sweating, stinking of cheap whiskey even from 10 feet away. He had a woman pinned against the brick wall. She was small, with hair the color of straw that was coming undone from a braid. Her face was already swelling, a dark purple blooming on her cheekbone. She wasn't fighting back. She was just curled in on herself, a human shield. And then I saw what she was shielding, on the dusty ground beside her. In a worn wooden crate lined with a thin blanket were 3 tiny, perfect babies. They were wrapped in scraps of cloth, sleeping right through the ugliness of the world they'd just entered. 3 little girls, 3 of them, the man spat, his voice full of venom. "More mouths, more trouble. You've cursed me." He raised his hand again, and I saw the pure terror in her eyes. It wasn't for herself. It was for them. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the memory of Martha, how gentle she was. Maybe it was the sight of those innocent babies. Or maybe it was just the years of pent-up silence inside me finally finding a voice. I cleared my throat. It was a loud, rough sound in the narrow alley. "That's enough of that," I said. The man whirled around, his eyes red-rimmed and furious. "What's it to you, old man? This is my wife, my business." "Your business looks a lot like cruelty to me," I said, my voice low and steady. I took a step forward. "I'm not as young as I used to be, but I've spent my life hauling hay bales and wrestling steers. My hands are like worn leather, and my arms are still strong." He looked at me, then at my hands, and maybe he saw something in my eyes he didn't. "Want a challenge?" he sneered. "She's useless. Gave me 3 girls. What am I supposed to do with girls?" I looked past him, at the woman. She was watching me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a tiny flickering spark of something else. Hope, maybe. I looked down at those 3 little faces in the crate, their chests rising and falling in the most fragile rhythm I had ever seen. My whole life, my empty house, my silent porch swing, it all flashed through my mind. This vast, aching emptiness I lived in every day. And here, in this filthy alley, was the opposite of that emptiness. It was life. Messy, loud, and helpless life. I looked back at the man. "You don't want them?" I asked, my voice flat. "Taken for all I care," he scoffed. "Her too. A barren field, the lot of them." He turned to spit on the ground, and in that moment, my decision was made. It wasn't even a thought. Really, it was a certainty, solid as the mountains on my horizon. I walked right past him and knelt down by the woman. She flinched, expecting a blow. I kept my movements slow. I looked her right in the eye. They were blue, the color of a stormy sky, and filled with a pain that I could feel in my own chest. "Ma'am," I said, my voice softer than I'd used in years. I reached out, not to touch her, but to the crate. I gently adjusted the blanket over one of the babies. My rough, calloused finger brushed a tiny, downy cheek. A jolt went through me, a warmth that spread all the way to my soul. I looked up at her again. Her lip was split, and a trickle of blood ran down her chin. She hadn't made a sound. "You're coming with me," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A promise. She just stared at me, her breath catching in her throat. The big man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Good luck to you, old-timer. You just bought yourself a whole heap of trouble." I ignored him. I stood up and offered my hand to the woman. She hesitated for a long second, her eyes searching mine, looking for the trick, the lie. She didn't find it. Slowly, shakily, she placed her small, trembling hand in mine. It was as light as a bird. I helped her to her feet. Then I carefully, ever so carefully, lifted the crate with the 3 babies. It was heavier than it looked, weighted with the future. I walked onto my truck. I opened the passenger door for her, something I hadn't done since Martha was alive. She slid in without a word. I placed the crate gently on the seat between us, making sure it was secure. I got in, started the engine, and didn't look back. As I pulled out of the alley and onto the main road, heading out of town, I glanced at her. A single tear was tracing a clean path through the dust and grime on her cheek. The drive back to the ranch was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional soft coo from the crate. I didn't know her name. She didn't know mine. We were 2 strangers, bound together by a moment of violence and a sudden, inexplicable act of grace. When we got to the ranch, I helped her out and carried the babies inside. The house felt different the second they crossed the threshold. The silence was gone. It was replaced by a presence, a weight, a meaning. I took them to the spare room, the one that had been Martha's sewing room. It was clean but dusty. I set the crate down on the bed. "You can stay here," I said. "It's safe." She finally looked at me, really looked at me. "Why?" She whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought about it for a moment. I could have said it was the right thing to do. I could have said I couldn't stand by and watch. But the real reason was simpler and more selfish. "My house is too quiet," I said. Over the next few days, a new routine settled in. I brought her food and water. I found old, soft linens for the babies. I learned how to heat a bottle and test it on my wrist. I learned the different sounds of their cries, one for hunger, one for pain, one for just wanting to be held. My big, clumsy hands, used to mending fences and pulling calves, learned how to be gentle. Her name was Ilara. She told me on the 3rd day, as I was holding one of the babies, trying to burp her over my shoulder. The baby's name was Hope. Her sisters were Faith and Grace. Ilara started to heal. The bruises on her face faded from purple to green to yellow, and then they were gone. But the bruises on the inside took longer. She was quiet, watchful. But I'd see her watching me with the babies, a soft look in her eyes. I'd come in from the fields and find she'd swept the floor or was humming a tune to them, a melody that was sad and beautiful all at once. Life bloomed in that old house. The scent of baby powder mixed with the scent of hay on my clothes. The sound of tiny gurgles and cries became the new soundtrack to my gaze. The porch swing wasn't just for me anymore. Sometimes in the evenings, Ilara would sit out there with a baby in her arms, and I'd sit on the steps, and we'd watch the stars come out without needing to say a word. One night, I was standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit fields. My fields, my quiet, lonely world. But it wasn't quiet anymore. Behind me, in Martha's old rocking chair, Ilara was softly singing to Faith, who was fussy. Hope and Grace were asleep in their crate, which we'd moved into the main room. The house was warm, it was full. It smelled of milk and clean laundry and simmering soup. It felt like a home again. Ilara's voice was low. "Thank you, Jed," she said. I turned. "For what?" "For seeing us," she said, her eyes shining in the lamplight, "when no one else would." I just nodded, my throat thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I realized then that on that hot, dusty day in the alley, I hadn't just rescued her and her girls. They had rescued me. They had walked into the vast, empty space of my life and filled it to the brim. The lonely rancher was gone. In his place was a man with a house full of hope, faith, and grace. And that was more than I had ever dared to wish for.